Just for information, we will be recording today's meeting. I need you all to be aware of that, and if everybody is happy with that, we'll carry on. Okay, I can see no objections, so we'll carry on through the meeting. We've got with us today, as well as our Trust Board members, our senior leaders. Many of them dialed in and will be listening to the board discussion, and will be given an opportunity when we get to that part of the agenda to pose any questions on items that are on the agenda. When they do that, our senior leaders, I'd like you to use the chat box to do that. Other than that, we'll not be using the chat box during today's meeting. Okay, so straight on then with the agenda. Have we got any apologies, Karen?
No apologies, Chairman.
So we've got a full team today. We've got no apologies. That's great. Any declarations of interest? No? Fantastic. OK, we've got minutes of the last meeting, which was circulated with the agenda, which today we're asked to approve. That meeting was on the 1st of September, and I'm not going to go through them page by page. Can I just ask if anybody has picked up any suggested amendments? No. Can we approve them then as a correct record? Yeah, thank you, Stuart. OK, and then straight on to matters arising and the action log, which is for consideration. And I have to say, we have no outstanding actions for this year, which is the first time that's happened in all the time I've worked at EMAS. So that is fantastic, actually, for the executive team to have carried through all the actions whilst we've been working through a pandemic. It really, really is excellent. So well done, everybody. It's a delight to see that. OK, so without further ado, I will ask if there are any questions from the public. We've had no questions submitted. Are there any questions from our senior leaders? Now's the time to raise them. Raise your hand if you're a senior leader and you would like to ask us a question. I can't see any, so with that then we'll move straight on and we'll go to the Chief Executive report. Richard, assume that we've read it and just pull out the key issues.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So good morning, everyone. What I will do as part of this update is, as Paul has described, I will assume that the paper has been read and I'll take any questions, but also Ben Holdaway will give an update on operational delivery and actions, and any exec colleagues who have any amendments or items to raise, then please do so. Just before we do so, though, Paul, if I can, please just put on record thanks and appreciation to everyone across the organisation for everything that they continue to do at such a challenging time. We don't, we don't know what the next few days, weeks, and months will bring us, but what is fair to say is pretty much uncharted territory. So I cannot thank enough for what everyone continues to do at such challenging times, and just think it's important to say that this morning.
Yeah, thank you, Richard.
So if I can, I'll pause and take any comments or questions, and then I'll hand over to Ben for an update of current operational delivery.
So Stuart, you'd like to ask a question, and then Gary, and then VJ.
Yeah, I've got a question on the paper, and then a couple of sort of, since the paper was written, questions, if that's okay. On the paper itself, on the freedom to speak up stuff, we had a bit of a conversation about this at Quality Governance the other week. I just thought it worth commenting on. I mean, we seem to have a low number compared to other trusts, but a high proportion of anonymity. And I just wonder if there's any connection between those, and more importantly, whether that sort of comparison across trusts is used for any other purpose other than our own benchmarking and learning. Do you want to take them one at a time, or shall I run on with the others?
Let's take them one at a time, Stuart.
Yeah.
So Nicola, could you take that one, please? Thank you, Stuart.
Of course, thank you. Good morning. Yes, I think you'll remember, Stuart, both at QGC and previously at Trust Board, we've had quite long discussions about the fact that the numbers of cases that we would get referred through Freedom to Speak Up is lower than other organisations. And you may remember that when the Freedom to Speak Up index was published earlier this year, I brought a paper which looked at triangulating our Freedom to Speak Up cases with other sources of how people can raise concern. So what we do know is that we have very high levels of incident reporting. As Kerry has previously reported, we are now increasingly using the early resolution HR process to resolve people's concerns. And I certainly believe that that is a factor in as to why people aren't raising Freedom to Speak Up concerns using that route. They're raising their concerns elsewhere. I think it's also fair to say that different organisations record Freedom to Speak Up in different ways. So the way that we record it is any Freedom to Speak Up referrals that come formally through the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian or myself or VJ as the non-exec lead. Other organisations with higher numbers tend to record things that are dealt with very locally out in divisions or departments, and we aren't capturing that information. I do think we have an issue. I think you're quite right. The fact that we have so many raised anonymously is not a position that we would like to be in. And you'll be aware through the development of the quality improvement strategy and the people's practices strategy that we're focusing a lot on how we can change our culture so that people feel safe to raise their concerns, but also have confidence that if they do that, that we will actually take action. We have now developed the Freedom to Speak Up module, which is live as of now. I think the link has been sent to you all. And we've tried to be really clear in that training about the difference between raising a concern anonymously and confidentially, the limitations that there will be if things are raised anonymously, and crucially the protections and support that we can provide to people who raise their concerns confidentially rather than anonymously. And we've talked before about the no wrong door. So really, really keen that actually I don't mind how people raise their concerns. We just want to know what they are. I do think there's still some work for us to do. And obviously, we're having our staff opinion survey being completed at the moment. I shall be very interested to see what those results reflect in terms of the key questions that are used to pull together the Freedom to Speak Up index. And I would hope that given a lot of the work that we've done over the last year to try and improve our culture, that we'll start to see some changes. Although we're still having low numbers, over 50% of the case, we've had 6 Freedom to Speak Up referrals now since, I think we've had one more since the point of writing this paper, and half of those have actually been raised confidentially rather than anonymously. So, and the more recent ones are the ones that we're getting confidentially. So I do think things are moving, but I think it will take a while.
Thank you. I think that's sorry.
Go on, Stuart.
That's a richer answer than just the table of benchmarking, which is a bit difficult to interpret solely in the paper. My other 2 questions were linked, and perhaps I'll pose them now, but I suspect Ben may touch on either of them later. Pauline, okay. I was going to ask for any update on any of the work on hospital collaborations, and then the obvious question about any impacts of more recent events since the paper was written, and in particular the Manchester ambulance service major incident yesterday. But I'll leave Ben to do his operational bit, and maybe they'll be picked up during that.
We'll ask Ben to cover that when he does the performance update. Thank you, Stuart. Just before we move on, just to say on that Freedom to Speak Up issue, Nicola, I've actually done the online training, and I can highly commend it. So any of our senior leaders that are listening, if you've not yet done it, it's worth doing. And I've also spent a good hour with the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian, listening to the process staff go through when they raise a Freedom to Speak Up concern. And I have to say that gave me an awful lot of reassurance about the system and the processes that are now in place. So thank you for that, Nicola, and for publishing that in the, I think it was in E-News, where we looked at the Freedom to Speak Up training. It's excellent. It definitely hits the spot. So I think we've got Gary and then VJ and then Jane.
Okay, thank you, Pauline. I think I have two questions which probably are for Ben, and then they're derived from page 4 on performance and activity. First one, Ben, if you're going to cover that in your update, I can wait. That we talk here about the increase in activity over last year had been 128 additional responses per day. It'd be easy to assume that's COVID related, but I just wondered whether, for a start, what our analysis shows us in terms of that increase, where it's coming from, are there any commonalities there? So that's the first question. And the second one is more around a clarification, really. I'm interpreting the information here. We're currently being funded to the 1920 contract, and we're working at activity 7% above that contract. So that means we're actually we're not being funded for that difference, 7% in effect. That's probably one of the contributing factors to the performance I would derive. Is that correct? It's hardly surprising, I'm guessing, that we're not hitting some of the standards if that's the case.
I'll answer your first question in my update, Gary, because I'll touch on the increase in activity. But the latter part, absolutely, it's a major contributing factor in our service delivery is the increase in demand. And again, I'll sort of demonstrate the 2 halves of the month, how they were so different once activity went up. So
I think putting that into context, it just points at how well the service is doing, given that the crews and the funding you have compared to the activity that's out there. That's kind of the only point I want to draw out. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Gary. I think some of this will come back to also in the update that Ben will be providing in a few moments, and it'll give some greater context around some of the particular challenges that we face.
I think if any of those people that have got their hands up are asking questions about performance, can we leave it until Ben's done his update, because that might well address the questions. So can we just take questions on the other aspects of the Chief Exec's report, and then we'll come back to the performance and activity. So, Jay.
Thank you, Chair. So if I could go back to the freedom to speak up matter, and I do acknowledge the efforts which EMAS is making to get better response, and making it clear what our position is on people when they come forward, and there's no wrong door. And also I got a lot of assurance from talking to Roger Watson, again going through the process from start to the finish. However, I think we need to bear in mind that 91% of people choose to stay anonymous, and whilst it's their absolute right to do so, however, we do need to get across that it affects the quality of our investigation, and even more importantly, our ability to be able to give feedback to people and learn from it. So the more people tell us exactly what it is, where the issues are, I think better the nature of investigation. And I know we are on that journey, but we need to factor this in as we move forward. The second question is around PPE supply, Richard, on page 3 in your report. And I'm seeking assurance that we've got adequate supplies now, and as we move into the winter months and the activity increases. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay. So I think in relation to the first question, I think unless colleagues say otherwise, I think the update from Nicola probably covered the majority of that question. The second one in relation to PPE at this point is not a concern for us. We have sufficient supplies in the organisation, and confident of the supply chain that we have access to, so we don't have any concerns at all about our ability to deliver PPE to our frontline staff. Thank you.
Jane.
Thanks, Pauline. One more question about freedom to speak up, if I may. Apart from the points that other colleagues have already made, the thing that jumped out at me was the fact that we're according to the table, not recorded the percentage of people who would use the system again. And that feels as though that culturally on our journey for continuous improvement, that feels like something, an important metric. So I was just wondering if Nicola could perhaps just expand on what the not recorded actually means, if there's something underneath that.
The reason that we've struggled to gain that feedback is because, as you will see from that table, during that year that covered, 91% of cases were raised anonymously, so we didn't have that ability to do that. We have now designed a feedback form which just asks some very simple questions, including, you know, would you use freedom to speak up as a route for raising a concern again, and also would you recommend using that route to anybody else who you were aware had a concern that they wish to raise. And now that we're getting more cases coming forward where it isn't anonymous, I'm hoping that during this year we will be able to obtain that feedback, and obviously that will come through in the regular reports that we do in relation to freedom to speak up. So watch this space.
Thanks, Nicola.
Thank you. Just before we move on for Ben to update, as you can see, Nicola, there's been quite a lot of interest in the Freedom to Speak Up report, and rightly so. I'm just wondering if we could have a further report to the board in 6 months on Freedom to Speak and how it's progressing, how the training's been accepted by staff, and to see if we're starting to see any change in that picture of the people raising concerns with confidence rather than anonymously.
Yeah, absolutely. I would recommend that I bring an end of year report that will provide some of that information. Whether the benchmarking will be available at that point, I'm not sure, but certainly we know our own internal data, which I think is useful.
Great, thank you. Okay, over to you then, Ben, to give us an update on performance and activity, and if you could pick up some of the issues that were raised, particularly around the hospital handover collaborative approach and any progress there, and also some update on the Northwest Ambulance Service major incident yesterday.
Will do. Thank you. Morning, everyone. Hope everyone's well. Yeah, as was alluded to, October has been a very challenging month, and it certainly got a whole lot harder as we move through the month, and very, very different to the early part of the year in terms of how we've been responding to COVID. It's this, as the 7 months have progressed, it's progressively, I think, got more difficult for us to manage for multiple reasons, which hopefully I'll touch on some of those as we go through. So you've got the paper, but I'll just give you a full update of October, where we finished. So as I always do, I'll look at the pillars that underpin our performance, starting with activity, because I think that in October was the single biggest factor in the challenges we had. So October finished just under 7%, just over 6.5% above contractual levels. That's 123 jobs on average a day. And if you compare straight to October 2019, it was 3% higher, which is an additional 59 jobs on average a day. If you put that into further context, that was only 17 responses a day fewer than we were dealing with in December last year. So we're already up at the December midwinter activity in October. Resourcing remained strong. So DCA hours, we put additional 1,300 DCA hours compared to October 2019. And that's even with a backdrop of increased abstractions due to COVID. So as we saw nationally, COVID, the wave sort of came through the month, and we saw the same sort of abstraction level. So we started the month round about 70 people absent for COVID. That peaked this weekend at 160. So even with that extra abstraction, we still managed to put additional hours out, and I'll come on to some of the actions in a bit. Thankfully, as we sit today, it's come down slightly again today. So we're down from the peak of 160 to today around 130 mark. So still high, but thankfully it's come down a little. Moving on to the next pillar, I'll move on to conveyance, non-conveyance, which again has been, I think, the good news story through October. We maintained a very low conveyance rate, and it was safe in terms of incidents reported for non-conveyance. So that was a 7% increase on last year. Sorry, a 7.8% reduction on last year's conveyance, and that was split by a 1% increase in hear and treat and a more or less a 7% increase in see and treat. So what that equated to was around about, despite the increase in activity, around about 3,500 fewer journeys that we did in October, which again will have consumed some of that activity because the job cycle is shorter, so it enabled us to to deal with that activity or be available for the next piece of activity sooner than we would have been had we had the same conveyance rate last year. Hospitals. So I think from an EMAS perspective, it's easy to sort of start thinking, well, hospitals are a lot better because they are compared to last year. But as we all know, last year was off the scale bad. So 2019, we lost 9,000 hours to hospital delays. In October this year, we lost 6,000. So yes, there was an improvement of 3,000 hours in lost hours, which will have helped, but we still lost 6,000 hours, an average of 22 minutes, more or less, across the month. And again, we saw that trend move up as we went through the month. And what we're seeing nationally now is although we're not in the dire positions we were in last year, a lot of other services are now are catching us up and feeling the pressures we've always had in hospital handovers. And again, I'll come back to the collaborative in some of the actions. So all those together meant that our performance finished for month of October unvalidated 7 minutes 50 seconds on Cat 1 mean and 13 minutes 52 on the 90th. Category 2 was a 30 minute and 15 seconds on the mean and 1 hour and 3 on the 90th. And Cat 4 was 4 hours and 1 minute on the 90th. And you can see from the paper how that compared to the first half of the month. So what I was talking about, the real pressure came in the last 2 weeks. So mid-month, we were on for example, on the Cat 2 mean, we were on 25 minutes and 52 minutes on the 90th. So a big shift towards the end of the month when the activity started to swarm in. So just touch quickly before I take any questions on actions we're taking and more things we're trying to put in place over the coming days, weeks. So around resource, so as you know, I've talked before, very simply turn about a tap on approach and a tap off approach. So tap on, how can we create more resource? So we've had the incentive scheme running now since the beginning of October. That's ramped up a little in November, so more opportunity for people to take overtime with incentive schemes. And again, that will change again in December as we go into the winter. We have as a team discussed whether we wanted to bring forward some of our planning for December into November. At this point, we've decided not to, because we don't want to burn the staff out too early, too soon. We want to make sure that we've got something left for us to use through December and January, which we know are going to be equally, if not more challenging as we go forward. Private support, we've asked for additional private support, and they're in the process now of providing that. So that again will come on board over the next few weeks. We've gone out to them again yesterday, actually, just to see if they can supplement even more with that, even on an ad hoc basis, just to help us as much as they can, increasing our resource. But as we saw, or even with those increasing resources, it's more or less covering the abstraction at the moment, rather than putting the extra in that we were hoping that it was going to do. That can change as the abstractions come down, but again, I'm thankful that we did have it, and the teams put all the effort to get it in there, because with the activity increase, it could have been a whole lot worse had we not had that resource. And the last thing in terms of resource, in November, we're going to get the fire support back on board. So Dave Williams and a few of the GM team are working on that now, and we hope we have them on board very soon to support us again like they did in wave 1. And the last thing we did, and this was only decided yesterday in terms of another action we're taking, we are now going to pause all statutory mandatory training until the end of January. So we won't be abstracting any staff on day to undertake their stats and man training and we'll take a decision on that again in January, whether we start it up again in February. In terms of the tap off, so that's all around how do we deal with demand differently once we've got it. So at the beginning of October, we implemented some new demand management scripts. They've been effective in terms of you've seen how they've supported our increase in hear and treat. However, we are now questioning ourselves whether we can take that any further, whether there's any more we can do. In light of what we saw yesterday with some of the other trusts that were struggling northwest, what actions did they take to lower their demand or deal with their demand in a different way? We'll take that feedback. We'll talk to them and see whether we can incorporate that into our planning. So we'll be looking at that closely over the remainder of this week to see how we can whether we can adapt our scripts. And then obviously we'll take that through. Once we've operationalised it, we'll take it through the governance route to make sure that we're covering it off that way. We are still part of the National C3 pilot. It's very, very small numbers, although in terms of what we are assessing due to the code set, we're now expecting that to be, once the national pilot rolls further, to be more codes added into that. So we're hopeful by the beginning of December there might be some more opportunity for us to do more within that from the national perspective. We've implemented a taxi SOP. So we use a taxi firm for our PTS provider, for PTS work in Derbyshire. We've rolled that over into the A&E side. So we know all the governance is done. We know they're safe in terms of usage. So we rolled that out in Derbyshire, beginning of October. We're now in a position to roll that further. So we'll be moving into Lincolnshire, Nottinghamshire and Leicestershire today. And then hopefully tomorrow, or certainly by the end of the week, we'll have got Northamptonshire covered as well. That, again, it's not huge numbers, but even if it takes 1 or 2 off a day, it's still a help to us. So we'll move forward on that. And just last one on the taxi SOP, we have had very early discussions with NHS 111 or whether we can adapt the SOP into their world as well. So if rather than them sending it down for an ambulance, is there a way they could use our SOP to book an ambulance, book a taxi rather than a SOP, an A&E vehicle if needed? And then finally, I'll just touch on the hospital handover collaborative. So both Nicola and I are involved in this. We've been on various workshops and various meetings. The big change from the last board update is the managing conveyance protocol that was being designed with our help has now gone live. So that includes a new escalation process that's already causing concern amongst our commissioner colleagues because we're escalating so often. And then within there's also strategic conveyance, which enables us to look across all of our hospitals and see where the pressure is or isn't. And then should we see pressure mounting in one particular hospital, we can make the decision to start sending vehicles elsewhere to other hospitals to try and manage some of that, manage that demand in a different way. And also within that policy is a rapid handover, which we had in place last year for Lincolnshire, so that's in there as well. So that's a step forward. What else is the collaborative doing? I'll be honest, it's not having much impact as we've seen from our handover go up. There's a national call tomorrow that we'll be on, and we'll be putting our views across there. And I'm having my regular catch-ups with NHSE and I around that as well. So we are involved in it, and it's moving forward. The good news from that is we have got that escalation policy now, but still not having the impact on hospitals that we'd hoped. So I'll stop there, Chair, and happy to take questions.
Thanks very much, Ben. Rich, did you want to come in first before we go to questions?
Yeah, if I could please. Thank you, Ben. A really, really helpful update, and I think it just puts into context some of the challenges which are being faced day in and day out. And despite the increased activity, I think to be achieving the timeliness of response for many patients, especially the high priority patients, is a real positive. I think just for colleagues as well, when we're talking about the pressures that we face at the moment, what we have to be mindful of is that in the first quarter of this year, when we were delivering very well against all kind of constitutional standards, we're in a place where, whilst activity was still high and we had a lot of COVID calls, the NHS pretty much came to a standstill around that. So there was normal business pretty much ceased. So therefore, when we got to hospitals, there was no handover delays, and we were able to get to our patients in a much more timely manner. What we are seeing now is obviously almost a dual running, in where there is normal winter pressures, there is normal business happening at the same time as the pressures related to COVID. And what we're also facing at the hospitals is where COVID interventions have been put into place to make sure that their EDs, for example, are safe and secure, is having an impact on our ability to hand our patients over. And then on top of that, when we have higher staff abstraction across the NHS, so that includes the acute sector, there's no surprise then it becomes a challenging environment on a daily basis. So I just want to put on record, thanks Ben, you, the team, operational colleagues, etc., for all that you're doing in these very, very challenging, tough times. And thank you for the additional actions that have been brought to the fore. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Okay, I've got a few people with their hands up to ask some questions. And first of all, Karen Tomlinson, you've got some questions?
Yes, Pauline, I have. Thank you very much. And in some ways, Richard's kind of said, because mine's more of a comment than a question, just to confirm that we had an in-depth discussion at Finance and Performance Committee last week around the performance. And yes, whilst there is some worrying numbers there in terms of both volume and the levels of activity and our performance targets, I just wanted to say that Ben and his team are doing a tremendous job, and you can take a lot of assurance that we are doing exactly what we should be doing and being as responsive as we possibly can given the environment that we're working in. So yeah, to confirm and reinforce Richard's comment, just a big thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Will Pope?
Yeah.
You got a question?
Thank you, Pauline. Yes, I have. Thank you, Pauline. And I'd reiterate what Karen has just said as well in terms of thanks. Ben, I've got a question, if I may, on the performance report, and it's around the patient safety columns or rows. So I'm do tell me if I've got this wrong, of course. I'm looking at the September 20 figure for the percentage of patient safety incidents that were low or no harm, and that's showing at 80, just a fraction over 80%. And I noticed that that's, whilst that's left the year-to-date figure, if you like, above target, it's actually quite a bit down on our previous monthly figures. And I wonder if you comment on that. And then if you like a part B to that, if you look at the line above, which is serious incidents per 1,000 incidents, that seems to be at an annual or close to an annual low. And I'm not sure that how that ties up to my first question. And the line below as well, the patient safety incidents per 1,000, that seems to be at a low. So I'm just, could you give me some assurance around this this data, and also whether this is a trend that we should be worried about?
I think it's probably fairer for me to take that.
Yeah, I think it probably is as well. These are the figures that are in the IBR.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In terms of the figure that's showing in red, you will often see that for the latest month, because until we've actually been able to conclude the investigation, we can't attribute the level of harm. So we will often see that the latest month looks like it's artificially low in terms of the percentage that are low or no harm. And you will probably find when we report next month that that figure will have gone up as we've been able to go through and actually determine the outcome for some of those incidents. So we'll keep an eye on that. In terms of the SIs, I think we have much better processes in place now for identifying and doing rapid review of incidents, and only reporting those that meet the threshold for SIs as SIs. You may recall from the Chief Executive's report that so far this year we've reported 32 serious incidents. We've actually had 5 of those downgraded, and that's because we were probably a little bit premature in reporting them as serious incidents. now what we tend to do, now that we have twice weekly incident review group, we do really rapid review where we review calls, we review EPRFs, and we can actually make that decision as to whether the double threshold for an SI has been met. So just to remind you that to meet the threshold for an SI, there has to be harm, and there has to be an act or omission that has led to that harm. And I think before, what we were doing was we were often reporting if we were aware of some harm, but actually we hadn't been able to determine whether there'd been an act or omission, and that's why we've ended up with a number being downgraded. And in terms of the PSIs, unfortunately, we don't always have incidents reported sort of on the day that they occur. There's sometimes a bit of a time lag. So again, I would expect that number to go up as things filter through. But certainly something we keep a very close eye on through Quality Governance Committee.
Thank you, Nicola, and thanks, Pauline, for allowing that question. So, in short, what we're saying is that the September figures at the moment is, if you like, interim figure, work in progress, and you'll keep your close eye on how that develops.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Will. The next question, I think, then is from Gary.
Thank you. Just Ben, when we were going through the update, you were going to just draw out any commonalities on. It could be the COVID-19 related, but it has to be listened to.
Yeah. Sorry, Gary, I forgot to mention that. Yeah. So the 100, not all the increase in 123 jobs can be put down to COVID. Our measure for COVID is how many we take through the pandemic protocol, card 36. You've heard me talk about before. We did see that increase, but not to the 123 a day level. We were probably 20, 30, rising up to 40 maybe towards the end of the month. So it was a proportion of the work, but certainly not all of it. So the next question, obviously, Gary. So what was? I guess.
If we know, it might be there's no common theme.
I think the common theme in all this is everything moved up. So we got more of your breathing problems, more of your chest pain, more fallers. So like we normally see when our activity increases, generally it's in all of the category, all of the chief complaints rather than specific ones specifically.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Okay.
Thank you, Ben and Gary. Paminda?
Thank you, Chair. Ben, I was just in view of the comments you made, right, that activity right now is already at mid-winter level, and I mean, if we were to hazard a guess, it is on that incremental trajectory. I just wanted to understand what the morale is in the start amongst all the colleagues, and is there anything that we need to be mindful of and perhaps preempt from a well-being standpoint that we need to be considering at this stage, that we don't get into a matter of burnout. I mean, we've seen major incidents in other ambulance services, and just to be, is there anything that we need to be considering, or what's your view on the overall morale?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's something we're really conscious of in the actions we're taking. So obviously the morale in my team, as most of them on this call, is absolutely brilliant and never been better. But no, I think I think we are very conscious of that. When we talk about the actions we're taking, what we don't want to do is lose the staff. So when we were talking yesterday about what we can do next, we don't want to be doing things which we know will turn the staff off our side, because we think they're still on our side in the general. They're still with us. They're still working with us rather than against us. So whenever we're thinking about what actions we're taking, we're always playing that through our conversations. And as I said, with the incentive scheme, we're mindful that overtime isn't always your best strategy, because the same people generally do overtime over and over again, and we don't want to burn them out. We don't want to use them too soon, because this isn't going away tomorrow. This isn't the next week. We're talking probably the next 4, 5, 6 months of this still. So we've got to be very conscious that we don't burn the workforce out with overtime incentives to now, because we're going to need them for the next few months. So I think in short that whenever we're thinking about what actions we can take, we're always thinking about the impact and that will have on the well-being and the morale of the staff. That's not to say some of the hard decisions we won't take, because we will if we think it's the right thing to do, but we want to make sure we make the right decisions.
Okay, I think Kerry's trying to come in. Yeah.
If I could on that,
okay,
that same point, it's on that same point, Chair. Just to add to what Ben has said, I think there are a couple of good measures in terms of staff morale, and one of which is the degree to which we are working very positively in partnership with our trade union colleagues, regular meetings, and the comments and feedback we've had from our trade union colleagues about the level of engagement with them to enable us to continue to support staff. So I think that is a measure as well in terms of the level of staff engagement. I think the second one is that because we're currently in the middle of the staff opinion survey, there are some specific measures in there around staff engagement and levels of morale. And when that closes at the end of November, that will give us a quantitative measure, if you like, of morale and engagement. Thank you.
And just to finish that point off, I think some of the lessons we learned around communication, all of us, in terms of how we communicate with staff through the early days of pandemic, we've continued. So, for example, I'm still having bi-weekly calls with all the managers just to tell them, A, it's bad, we know it's bad, let's not try and hide that, and B, what we're doing about it. So we're making sure that message is going out every other week to all the managers who want to join that call, and we're regularly getting 50 managers on that call. I think the last thing I'll say is that Richard and I had this conversation around morale, and we're not asking us to know that we're not probably going to increase morale at this point, but the key is we don't make it any worse. So our objective is to keep morale as it is. It's going to be very hard to increase it with everything that's going on, but we certainly don't want to make it worse. So that's our objective.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you everyone on this part. I think this is also something where we have to reflect on the type of support that we give to our staff as well, because the environment we're in at the moment is we're not just dealing with an extremely busy ambulance environment. Everybody's is affected, be it directly or indirectly, by COVID. It could be in their sort of personal, domestic lives as well. So sometimes what people are coming to work with may be challenges which are impacting on their ability to do their job, which are not directly related with their job. So we have to be able to make sure that we can give support to people in different ways as well. And some of that will be with techniques and approaches to which we're not familiar with. And I know Kerry and her team are doing a huge job behind the scenes to provide that additional level of support. And this is something that we're going to have to continue to adapt, use whatever mechanisms we have available to us around how we undertake almost like temperature checks of the organisation, what is causing increased stress and pressures, but making sure that we can keep the basics running. So making sure staff get off on time where possible, making sure people get their breaks where possible. Let's not allow people to work excessive amounts of hours where they will be impact on their health and well-being. So lots of things that we have to keep in the background here at the same time as maximising our ability to respond to patients. So a really good point what Belinda raised, and this is something which certainly as an executive team features in all of our meetings whenever we're together.
Just before I move to the rest of the question, we've got a little bit of back noise, so I don't know if somebody's not on mute, but we've got a little bit of, I don't know what you call it. Feedback, thank you, Karen. We've got a little bit of feedback actually, which is making it difficult to hear one or two people, so just check that you're on mute if you're not about to speak. We've got VJ, Stuart, then Jane, and then I think we need to bring this discussion to a close. So VJ and then Stuart and then Jane. VJ, you're on mute still.
Apologies, Chair. Richard has already partly answered my question around the issues and stress that staff might be bringing to work with unrelated to EMAS and the mechanisms in place. I want to just go back to the incentive schemes, Ben, and again, you partly answered it in terms of it's good that it's been introduced. It's good that there's a take up of it and there is appetite for staff to engage with it. My question is, how is the take up monitored to ensure that, you know, there isn't an element of some staff just working too hard over a long period of time, and then in turn their health and well-being is being affected. So, you know, it might sort of have a negative unintended consequence long term. And the question is around where is the monitoring done then?
So I think there's two ways that we control that. One is the monitoring is done at the local level, so the divisional teams and their resource teams are keeping an eye on that. But also there is a limit. So the way the incentive scheme is built, it's built on how many hours they do. And once they get to a certain set of hours, they can't earn any more incentive. So it's not to their advantage to keep going and going and going, if that makes sense. So
there's a cut-off point.
There's a cut-off point, yeah. So that in essence really, you know, although some might do a little bit more, it's unlikely they're going to do lots and lots more because they won't generate more incentive.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stuart.
Yeah, thanks. I'm sort of thinking through a little bit about what the future might be like, and I'm not sure whether we're bracing ourselves for a typical winter or whether we're bracing ourselves for a replication of the earlier lockdown. But the specific question out of that is, when we went into national lockdown last time, there were various changes to protocols and codes and so forth at a national level. Is that anticipated or expected this time, or is it too soon to tell?
So I'm laughing because we had quite an interesting debate about this one last week. So we are still at the same level of the pandemic protocol as we were in the first phase at level 1. We're not anticipating that to change at this point to go to level 2, although there was some discussion around that last week or over the last couple of weeks. So we are exactly where we are, bar a couple of codes that were changed back through lessons learned. We are where we were in April, Stuart, in regards to that, and we're not expecting at this point now to move up a level. In terms of our planning, because you're right, I might cover this a bit on my on the update about the winter ConOps as well, but it's quite a strange planning environment we're in this year because we just do not know. So you know, we went through the tiered system, so tier 1, 2 and 3, and the different implications that has on the nighttime economy. And now we're going into November where we're going to have a full lockdown. So what's going to happen in December, we don't know. So the best way we're planning for that is we're planning for a normal winter. So the key dates that we always know are going to be busy during December, we're still planning for them to be as busy. New Year's Eve, for example, we're planning for a normal New Year's Eve at the minute, because the last thing we want is to be told mid-December everything's going to be open on New Year's Eve, and we're struggling to pull stuff together. So we're planning as if it's going to be a normal year plus COVID. So that's how we're planning for it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. And then the last question before we summarise, Jane.
Thanks, Chair. Just picking up a little bit more on the wellbeing question, and I'm not quite sure if this is a question or a comment or a flag, but something that in the voluntary sector we're now starting to have more conversations about than we have had is the long-term workforce planning issues of the mental health impacts of the pandemic. And I think you know, clearly there's a parallel for me in the sense that in the voluntary sector a lot of people have been in crisis response, we've got to do it mode in exactly the same way as obviously in the ambulance service they would be. But we're now starting to think about what's that going to mean for the workforce planning in probably 7, 8, 9 months time, when, please God, the actual crisis has passed over, but people are then able to kind of let go of that. And in the context of having to deal with all the you know, the whole global, I don't mean global, I think global, but the, you know, everything about the crisis impacting on their families, their own well-beings, as well as the work they do. So it was really just a kind of a question, a bit of a flag in terms of our workforce planning. Are we thinking ahead on that score at this point, or is it still kind of, there's just too much else going on in the immediate to be able to have the capacity to do that?
Thanks, Jane. I think Kerry wanted to come in, and then Richard wanted to add something.
Yes, just on Jane's point, I think it's a really valid point, Jane, in terms of the long-term impact on workforce planning. And whilst we have already started thinking about the principles for next year's workforce plan and agreeing those at an executive level, I think it is a consideration that we need to apply to determining those principles and the basis upon which we plan. To give some assurance about the availability of interventions and support for staff, I think everybody is already aware of the vast amount of support that we have for both mental and physical health at a local level, and there are also a suite of national resources that we make available to our staff, and many of those resources at the moment are continuing to be available for the longer term as well. But I think we will take that point about the impact on our workforce planning into the assumptions that we're currently looking at around our workforce plan. The other thing I wanted to mention whilst I'm on, Chair, if you don't mind, is a point of accuracy before we move off this item, off the Chief Executive's report, because on the IBR there is an inaccurate measure on one of the workforce measures. So W12 quotes figures that are actually the wrong figures. They are the year-to-date figures as opposed to our rolling compliance figures. So just for accuracy, the current position on W12 as at the end of September is a compliance rate of 90.45%. So not the 35.79% that's currently quoted. So these will be corrected in next month's report, but I just wanted to be clear on that for an accuracy perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Have we got that captured, Karen, in the minutes? Thank you. Richard.
Yeah, thank you for that, Kerry. And just on the point Jane you raised around workforce planning, I absolutely would agree with that aspect of it. I think the one bit for me, which is the bit where we have to make sure we give the appropriate level of focus. We often talk around the extreme pressures and in the organisation directly for frontline staffing and including the EOC staffing. We have to remember we've got, almost a third of the organisation has now for probably about 6 to 8 months have been working in different ways, working remotely, going into kind of autumn winter time. There's a real impact on those colleagues as well, which, if we get to the sort of springtime and see some real changes, by that point, many colleagues will have been out of the work environment for about a year, and that's extremely excessive and an area where we have to make sure that we give the appropriate level of focus there and support to those colleagues who are not necessarily, in the sort of the front of the organisation day in, day out. So just a really important point I just wanted to make around workforce. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I think we need to bring this item now to a conclusion. I think we've had a really good discussion on the Chief Executive's report, and we've given it due consideration. It was really helpful to hear the additional actions that the operations team are putting in place to help address the ongoing demand pressures and challenges that have been faced during October, and no doubt will continue to see increase in November and December. So thank you very much, everybody. We've considered the report and we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a staff story, and it's a presentation that Leon's going to share with us. I think he's going to share his screen and we'll work through the presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Chair, can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Hopefully the slides have changed. Thank you very much indeed for affording me the opportunity to talk about both staff and patient stories related to the specialist practitioner model. I'm hoping to take about 10-11 minutes just to quickly present where we are with SP, then talk about some staff opinion and also some patient impact, if that's okay, Chair, and then take questions. As you know, we've been working through a clinical operating model and looking to bring in a specialist practitioner role to empower our people, inspire our people, lead change and share our vision of a changing culture here at EMAS. And I'm delighted to say that following setting quite robust educational and experience criteria for the role. 64 internal staff from EMAS applied for the post of SP in the middle of our COVID outbreak, and 43 were shortlisted and went forward to an online assessment, of which 30 passed, and 29 then went forward to a full day of clinical credentialing and face-to-face assessment, both with real patients, mock patients, and with mock patients in a clinical environment, telephone triage, and they all went through a robust credentialing assessment. The outcome of that board, to update you, was that we had 25 internal clinicians fit for purpose for specialist practitioner at Band 7, and we set about breaking them into 2 cohorts due to COVID for a 2-week development programme. It was levelled off against their pre-programmed screening of their educational gap and needs, and we then focused that training very much on the new skills, equipment and ways of working that we visioned here at EMAS. Whilst embedding the confidence in the SP, our cultural change here at EMAS, the vision, engagement and contribution of each member of our new SPs, and with a quality and safety overview. And the delivered 2-week programme, 2 cohorts, one in September, one in October, 25 staff in total, was a mixture of e-learning, remote lectures, scenarios, case discussions and self-directed learning, using a strong faculty of ED consultants, HEMS doctors, palliative care consultants, security specialists. You get the idea that we used a high level of educational input into our faculty in order to deliver the upskilling of our SPs. And here is our first cohort, pre-masks being required in educational facilities, appropriately socially distanced at Meridian, having their SP education. I have to say they were a fantastic group to work with, Chair, very engaging, and gave as good as they got during the 2 weeks of education. If I could move on quickly to some staff feedback. As you know, our first cohort went live in Leicester and Northamptonshire on the 28th of September, and the second cohort went live in Notts, Derby and Lincolnshire on the 19th of October. And we had an email from one of our SPs, and I think it speaks for itself. During the early part of SP, I've managed to use my wide range of skills and attend a range of cases of high acuity, assisting patients with decision making, sorting out minor wounds and dressings. Local crews have been enthusiastic and encouraging about the role and appreciate my support and guidance of an SP. I've worked collaboratively with community nurses to consider best outcomes for patients and clinical outcomes in a social setting. I've noted enthusiasm from local GPs who are keen to strengthen relationships with me as an SP and EMAS. There have also been the occasional traumatic incidents which I've been employed to provide best care and senior scene leadership. My focus here is on the true impact I feel I have made. My first is in relation to a child with a serious ear infection, where I used my new skills of examination to keep the child at home and discuss with the GP. My second relates to my ability to self-deploy to patients where I know my new skills will be of use in end-of-life care and dressings, ensuring appropriate analgesia and referral to GPs and district nursing teams. Whilst this sounds straightforward, the patient will normally present a crew with complex challenges, firstly needing dressings, analgesia and onward referral, and my 2-week course assisted me with this. My final update is in relation to end-of-life care patients, where I was able to leave them at home, liaising with the GP on appropriate medicines and ensure appropriate prescribing and onward referral to palliative care. In the first few weeks, this operational role is an absolute need and benefit. Our focus and knowledge and skills have been to the high acuity and low acuity patients, and I feel it has been of great benefit. That's just from one of our SPs focusing on the care he's afforded to patients. And with your permission, Chair, I'd like to go on to an unsolicited email from a second of our new SP cadre regarding a personal impact on them. Apologies in advance, this is a lengthy email, but I feel I want to share my story with you and others at EMAS about creating this specialist practitioner role. I think it's important not only to look at the benefits of the role, which no doubt bring to patients, but the benefits to staff. I know that staff retention is something you're hoping to achieve at EMAS. I joined Lives as a responder 10 years ago and when I was working in a school. I enjoyed it, so decided to have a career at EMAS, and I became an ECA in January 13. Sadly, at the time, there was no progression at EMAS, so I applied and funded myself on a paramedic course. Throughout my course, I had frequent bank ECA shifts to keep in touch, and my EMAS mentor pushed me hard as a student, and I hated my time at points, so I was grateful for that support. I happened to mention in passing to a paramedic that I had a background in education and that I was interested in topping up my BSc, and they supported me in finding the funding for distance learning and topping this up at Coventry University. I think I happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right person, and had already recognised that with baseline qualifications for paramedics changing to degree level, I'd be best placed to upskill. I'd started to feel burnt out and demoralised with the lack of progression at EMAS and feared I would become a statistic when university told us that paramedics generally had a 5-year road life. Unfortunately for me, my partner is a very good paramedic and has experienced at EMAS with heart, DOMS, comms and DCA roles. It's been quite overshadowing for me, and I found it caused me a lack of confidence. Since finding out I was successful in getting the SP role, I barely told anybody. In fact, I finished my last shift in division, cleared out my locker, and was shocked when the oncoming crew found out I wouldn't be returning. For the last few weeks, I've been suffering from imposter syndrome, believing at some point you'd realise that I had a lack of experience with only 5 years post-registration. But the main point I want to make is that even though we've only just finished our first week of training as an SP, I feel my confidence has increased, starting to feel like perhaps I was successful in the role because I'm the right person. It feels like a real struggle mentally to get to here, but everyone we have had input in this week, including SPs, are so enthusiastic and empowering. I feared that I would be completely out of my depth, but in fact I've been practicing some of the decisions we've been discussing day to day, and I feel this role is going to push me clinically. I'm excited to be a specialist practitioner at EMAS. This course has given me much renewed enthusiasm for my career at EMAS and care that I can provide to our patients. Consider me retained. I no longer feel I want to leave this role. Personally, thank you to Leon and all of the team at EMAS for bringing this role to fruition. Pauline, just 2 staff stories there. And if I could then go on to discuss this patient impact. This is from yesterday. This is from yesterday's SPs. I saw 8 patients, only 1 sent in with an urgent crew, no DCAs used, 2 referrals to physio. What a completely different day. I self-dispatched to 9 jobs in 1 shift, only 2 to ED, but they took their own transport. I only used 1 DCA. SP in our control room yesterday, lots of great discharge and appropriate referrals. We're working on a phone line to help. I had great discussions today and utilised urgent crews if needed, left some at home, worked really well with the Lincolnshire Chems team, who were very keen to work with us and make good joint decisions. I've really enjoyed my day today, Monday, on SP 0536 with some great jobs. It's rewarding to safely leave people at home with firm plans. Thank you, Craig, for offering to be support. This is a person in the control room, and 1 GP assisted me in sorting out a patient with a deep vein clot who would normally have gone to hospital. Another SP yesterday, managing to sort out knee pains, leaving individuals at home at risk, sorting out an RTC, and then dealing with a 90-year-old who would otherwise have been taken to ED with shortness of breath. And finally, I think the one I'm most proud of, Chair, a very complex young female pregnant with collapse and vomiting. Our SP was able to do an in-depth assessment, use some additional skills, and indeed make a direct referral to the early pregnancy assessment unit at LRI, avoiding ED. Our SP in the control room yesterday co-located with CAT, the ROM and CCSD, taking multiple referrals backwards and forwards. And one of our SPs yesterday on shift in Newark, a mock picture with a patient making appropriate assessment. Where are we now? We're on bi-weekly Teams meetings with our SPs. We're providing CPD support on a programme. We're actively monitoring their data. As I said, the second cohort have now gone live. We've got 25 SPs working across all divisions and DOC. Here's our monitoring, Chair. This was in my initial presentation, but I've asked for updated this morning. So if I could share this slide with you. SPs have been to 547 patients in the first few weeks with only 25 members of staff. They have only conveyed 35% to hospital, Chair. That means 65% of patients left at home or an alternative pathway. And where a pathway has been wanted to be used, our SPs have used it in 85% of cases. This is a Power BI software where I can break down details to individual categories, individual jobs, both AMPDS, dispatch complaints, and also the clinical impression of our staff, where we can really start to drill down on where our SPs are having the most impact. Thank you very much for listening. I have rattled through it, but I wanted to cover both the staff side of the impact of SP and those patients that I discussed just yesterday who are having a different experience from EMAS because of the role of our SPs across EMAS. Thank you very much. I'd love to take any questions.
Thank you, Leon. That was a great patient and staff story. Thank you very much for sharing that. And I'll now take some questions. And I think first question from Stuart, then from VJ, and then from Jane.
Thank you, Leon. I agree. It was an excellent presentation in conveying it. And really, my comments was to build on. We had a version of that presentation, albeit not by Leon, who was on leave at QGC. And what has been excellent is to see it turned into the reality with the staff and patient comments, and would really appreciate that. I was about to ask a question about ongoing monitoring when your dashboard slide appeared, so thank you for that. I hadn't seen that before, but probably just for the record, we're equally excited at QGC about this development, and I can't remember the framework we set, but we said we'd have a look at some of the stats and the metrics and how it was going in, I can't remember if it was 3 or 6 months time, but just to get the bigger picture. But I think Leon, you've done a really eloquent job of giving us the sort of the nitty gritty of what's really happening out there. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. Look, they're your SPs. You've all supported us to get these SPs working for patients in the East Midlands. That dashboard is the beginning of the clinical interface. PMIT are now pushing in some on-scene time data and some jog cycle data alongside it to pull it all into the same dashboard, so it'll be a more useful utility to look at the overall impact of SP at EMAS. That is alongside individual interviews as the whole process. Our clinical audit and research unit are undertaking some formative assessment of the impact of SP as well as the summative from our first 25 talented people. Thank you, Stuart.
Great, thank you. VJ.
Thank you, Chair. Leon, thank you very much. That was really inspiring, and it's such a good news story to hear on a day like this. I think what really inspires me is that for a number of years, our staff have talked about career development, career progression within EMAS. Well, here's an example that they've told us something and EMAS has done it. I think we just need to clock it, because we are so used to just dealing with problems that we don't always stop and pat ourselves on the back. And this one truly deserves that. The second thing is it should really help us with retention. That's been another area of concern, because there are not opportunities within EMAS. The confidence of this colleague shines through his email response to you. Obviously, you have outlined the patient impact and the positive impact. My question is, having done so well, you have actually raised expectations of our staff. So this time 64 people applied. How are you going to manage when more people are knocking on your door and asking for, would there be another cohort?
Yeah, VJ, I'm delighted to take that question. Look, the initial SP model was for 66 members of staff across 11 locations. We've only recruited the initial 25. The executive are acutely aware that we wish now to push forward to recruit those additional. We're only at an interim operating capability at the moment, but those 500 or 600 patients in the first few weeks having a very different experience from EMAS, with only a 35% conveyance to ED. I'm really, we're willing this on now to recruit those final sort of 40 odd staff to bring us up to a full operating capability of specialist practitioners across all 5 divisions. The expectation will be that we will continue to push SP with our talent at EMAS, ask our senior managers to spot that talent, and there'll be a rolling programme. I think people in the SP role will probably be the talent that will look for other opportunities outside of EMAS. I'd like to retain them, but as it comes up, this will be a continuous rolling programme of promoting our internal talent once we fill that delta gap up to 66, BJ.
Jane and then Karen.
Thanks, Chair. And echoing what everybody else has said, really inspiring presentation, Leon. Thank you. Really cheered up the day. The thing that jumped out at me was how close we came to losing somebody who was obviously talented and motivated enough to fund their own development. And there's only ever going to be so many opportunities through a scheme like this, as you've just highlighted. So I suppose my question is, what are we able to do systematically to identify those hidden gems in our workforce and give them that little bit of extra attention, extra care, extra support, so that we don't lose them when they have that level of motivation and capability?
Yep, great question, Jane. Kerry and myself have been looking at both the appraisal and the clinical supervision models at EMAS. I'm hoping to present. I've just come back from leave, but I'm hoping to pull a paper together, having spoken to some of the AOMs on clinical supervision this Monday or the Monday after, looking at laying down the beginnings of what true clinical supervision could mean for EMAS. And I know we'll pick up on that on the people plan and the priorities. But I think that we should be able to spot this talent early, we should be able to nurture it, and we should be able to develop it, and we should be able to assure these staff that EMAS is the place for them, and that we want them on our journey, you know, to delivering that outstanding level of care for patients. So with true clinical supervision from the right people within the operational structure, with the right outcomes from a clinical supervision and appraisal process, you would pick up on the talent and indeed develop them.
Great answer. Thank you. Karen.
Yeah, I mean, it's building on all those points, really. And the question was the next cohort and how many are we going to go on to achieve, which has been answered, and that's excellent. But we do know, and I can't remember the exact paper, where specialist practitioners were being developed for primary care. And there is something around this, I think, that we need to share this success story across the health community, so people understand how this specialist practitioner can work in the ambulance service to support primary care, as opposed to primary care developing the model for themselves.
Yeah, there's two bits to that, Karen. I think the first is that I'm sure myself and Nicola, when we've got the first bit of data on the SP impact and the quality of care, ensuring it's safe care, would look to present that to the quality assurance group from our commissioners. So we would look to be sharing that into the wider community when I've got some firmer data. Remember, though, that first dashboard is only 25 practitioners are covering part-time rotas, and we're only just getting the first impact in our control room. So there's much work to be done, but we'd look at sharing that through quality assurance group. The second part on primary care networks, that work is ongoing, and I know Will is looking to update executive in the next couple of weeks. Will, is that right, on where we might be with our ongoing offer to primary care?
Thank you.
Yeah, that's right, Leon, and it's obvious that the work that's been done on SP flows into that conversation around primary care networks. The way that the money's being moved around the healthcare system does fund first contact community paramedics in primary care in PCNs. So this is an ideal opportunity for us to share the best practice that we've had and look to see how we can support them going forward.
Yeah, we've just got to be very mindful and very careful that migrate, having gone through all the training programme and everything with EMAS.
Yeah, Karen, just to assure you, I'm doing everything I can with personal leadership and with twice monthly CPD and professional development sessions, been led by Ian Massell as their clinical champion for SPs, and we're really giving them a home and working very differently with this group of staff.
Great, thank you. Mel, I think, did you have your hand up, Mel?
I did, but Leon covered it really. It was just to provide assurance. There is a communications plan behind this as well. So touching on the request to share more of this widely, that's something that Anthony and the team's working with Leon and the wider group on this. So we're looking to have a Big 3 animation and some other materials created to promote this further afield. It's an excellent project.
Yeah, Mel, just to re-emphasise, Anthony's done a huge amount of work on this, but with only 25 and with the second 12 only coming online in the last 2 weeks, we felt like we had to have a bit of weight behind it before really pushing the progress. So we've got some numbers now, we've got some weight, and Anthony will be pushing out that visual animation in November, I think, Mel.
That's right, yeah.
Great, thank you. Well, that, as you can tell, Leon, that story really inspired everybody. So thank you very much for bringing that. And a couple of key messages about the impact it's having on patients, the impact it's having on staff morale and retention, and how we're capturing that, and the importance of sharing this really excellent news story for patients and for staff with our commissioners. I think it's really important when we're ready to do that. Okay, so thank you very much, and I think we'll move straight on, if we can now, and over to Will on the operational plan.
Thank you very much, Chair. So the operational plan is presented here at board today. It's been through several iterations through its development. We've seen it at board development before and through Finance and Performance Committee as well. This dovetails with the financial plan, including the activity and workforce plans that we've seen here at board before, and is effectively a mid-year update of the operational plan narrative that we always have in EMAS every year. The reason it's a mid-year update is because when the first plan was created, it didn't include reference to COVID and all of the arrangements for EU exit, which this plan does. So it's obviously written at a point in time. Things do change on an ongoing basis, as I'm sure we'll talk about later on, around things like the finance arrangements and the planning for 21-22. Things do change. It is correct at this point in time, and it's our plan for the remainder of this financial year, so 2021. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Will. Are there any questions for Will before we're asked to accept the report? Are we, aren't we?
We're asked to approve it.
To approve the report. So, Gary, I think you've got a question.
Yes, thank you. Will, it talks in the report, it's on page 18, about working assumptions around the commissioners providing reductions in demand. Just wonder whether any ideas have been put forward by the commissioners to do that as yet.
We're in dialogue with the commissioners as we speak around what that can look like. I think it's fair to say that work is underway on both sides in terms of the different opportunities that arise. A lot of the commissioner opportunity is around making sure that they're working with their 111 provider as effectively as possible, putting in additional triage for category 3, for example, which we've seen piloted in different areas already, looking at a collaborative approach for that going forward. So it's more around demand management of that lower acuity work coming to us. Specifically, that's where the commissioners have been focusing their efforts. To kind of dovetail that, we're also working with the commissioners to look and work out those opportunities with them too. So it's not just the commissioners disappearing and looking at their own data. We're helping them and working with them to work with those opportunities. At the same time, with predominantly DHU is our predominant 111 provider across the East Midlands. We've been actively working with DHU to look at opportunities where we can look at some of that lower acuity work as well, trying to manage demand. So although I can't give you anything concrete, Gary, today, which is reflected in that plan, the conversations are absolutely ongoing, with data being shared on a routine basis, looking for those opportunities to expand work that's already gone on.
That's reassuring, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, as Will said, we have seen this plan in draft before, so if there are no further questions, are we happy to approve it for the remainder of this financial year? Yep.
Yes.
Great, lovely, thank you. Okay, the next agenda item then is links actually quite closely with that, and this is the winter concept of operations plan, and I think Ben's going to lead the discussion on this. Assume that we've read it, Ben. It's a weighty document. Over to you.
Yeah, well, so yeah, as you can see, I'll assume you've read it, and it's been through RSGG and the Quality Governance Committee and had a good airing there. 4 points I'll pick out of the plan. You've seen it before in terms of the ConOps for previous winters. So it sets the strategy and the structure for how we'll manage winter, but we've also this year included COVID and of course EU exit that are both on the horizon. Well, COVID's happening and EU exit is on the horizon. Alongside this, there sits tactical plans, which for each division and EOC. And this year we've built in the regional operation management team. We've got a plan as well. So we've built in tactical plans that will sit alongside these, that will be the delivery arm. There'll be a command structure in place through the winter. And that's something I was going to pick up in my previous one. I think we've got to be conscious around the capacity within our command structure. We've now had a command structure in place for 7 months, and we only broke it for a month before that for last winter. So we need to be mindful again of the capacity within our command structure around seeing us through this next period. And even though we've been dealing with what we have in terms of the activity, we've still managed to do a number of tabletop exercises led through Jim's team and all the GM's team, just to test our concept and how we're going to manage winter, and they've been very successful as well. So an awful lot of work has gone into this to get us in the best position we can be as we head into the next few months. Any questions?
Ben. Thank you. Karen, you've got a question or a comment?
It's well, a question stroke comment. You know the planning assumptions on threat and risk, Ben, on page 12 thereafter?
Yeah.
I think what would be helpful for us as an organisation and to match our scoring matrix is that where we've got the likelihood and impact and then a risk score, I think it would be helpful if we use the number scoring system that we use in the BAF. Okay. Because I've had a quick calculation on it, and a third of all the risks that have been identified are either 16 or above, which is a real high score in terms of risks. And then I wondered if that risk obviously gets played into the risk on the BAF matrix as well. Yeah. So it's just a comment. I just think it would add better weight to it. That was all.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. We can incorporate that into. Yeah. Go on. Sorry.
Sorry, Richard's just suggesting that the team take that away as an action, yeah, and apply the scoring matrix to the planning assumptions, threat and risk, starting under section 7.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And the other point, if I may, Chair, is on page 26 under communications, and I know that we've raised the issue in there around patient communications, but and Mel may want to comment on this, but I just wondered if at what point, and I know this might be nationally led as well, are we going to raise the level of concern into the community? You know, when we get to a point where we can't get to some cases, etc., because of the pressure in the system. Bearing in mind the earlier conversation around the pressures in the system now, at what point are we really going to lay this out into the community so that they all understand where we are and the fact that there may well be greater delays, or in fact patients that we can't convey and choose to leave at home?
Can I come back there, Pauline, or sorry, Ben, do you want to?
No, you go first, and I'll back up on a more tactical level what we do here.
Okay, so I suppose the assurance is that as a comms team, we're part of the 24/7 on-call rota. So we have a really good relationship with the strategic commanders who keep us in the loop when pressure starts to be felt. We use our social media channels really well. So yesterday we put out a message to just let our communities know that we were starting to experience pressures. Before we even get to that stage, we use our social channels and also our work that we do with local resilience forums across the patch to promote other channels to colleagues and the public. So we've been promoting other services like GPs and so on as part of business as usual. So we have an escalation process in place which allows us to take different channels and different actions at the right time. So we don't just suddenly wait for something to go terribly wrong and then start saying something. So we're part of the wider team that can start warning, informing when we need to.
Okay, thanks, Mel. That's fine.
Do you want to add anything to that, Ben?
I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say about how we link in with the comms team around pushing the daily messages out around levels of stress in the system.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? I've got one, Ben, and actually it'll come when you go away and apply the scoring matrix, because when I read the risks 8 and risk 9, they come out actually a different way to the way I would have expected them. So risk 8 is about staff welfare being compromised at times due to high demand. That comes out as a moderate risk, where industrial action of public sector workers, example teachers, comes out as a high risk. Now I would have thought that at the moment, because of all the pressures we've just heard about and absenteeism, across not just EMAS but other parts of the NHS, and the impact on of absence because of COVID, that actually it would have been the other way around, and that the risk to staff welfare is higher than the risk of industrial action.
Yeah. We'll take that away, Chair.
Yeah.
When we go through the list of scoring, we'll look at that.
Yeah, just test them again, and the same with threat 21 or risk 21, which is an infectious disease outbreak, e.g. flu, will expose the service to increases, and that it says here possible. Well, actually, it's happening. So I think it's more than possible, Ben.
I hadn't noticed it, but yeah, I think you might be right. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So if there are no further questions, we're asked to take assurance from this plan, which I think we have done, and the executive team will go away and apply our scoring mechanism to the risks that I've identified throughout the document. Thank you very much, everybody. The next agenda item then is the transformation programme update, which is being presented to us by Will. And again, Will, it's a very comprehensive paper. It's well put together. I assume we've read it.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is the first time the board will have seen a paper on the new transformation programme that was approved. I'm trying to remember this last board or the board before recently, and you'll see that, as you've said, Chair, the paper's comprehensive. It lists the 4 different key areas of our transformation programme. There's a bit of a status update against each one of those. What I suggest we do in terms of the paper, and any questions, Chair, is any of the exec SROs which are identified on the diagram in the report. Happy to answer any questions. And likewise, I'm sure any of the non-executive colleagues on the board would like to provide either some assurance or any questions around any of those areas. I'm sure we can take those and answer them as appropriate. So
okay,
I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thanks, Will. Are there any questions or comments for Will on his paper before we can take it for assurance? See, I told you it was a good paper, Will. And it did what it said on the tin. Thank you very much. And we've received the paper, we've read the paper, and we accept it for assurance. Thank you. And then finally, in this section, before we move on to the assurance section of the agenda, we've got the progress report on the People Priorities Action Plan. Perry.
Thank you, Chair. Well, again, I will assume everybody's had the opportunity to read the paper. The only things I would add is in reference to the action plan at the back of the document that shows the current status of the milestones, just referencing the work around increasing flexibility in frontline operational roles. You'll see in there on page 2 of the action plan that a number of milestones, the first 2 milestones, have been met around meeting with the divisional general managers to really start to talk about what do we mean by flexibility in frontline roles and how can we promote this further and create greater opportunity for flexibilities. So I had the opportunities to meet with the divisional general managers fairly recently, had a good conversation, and I think the key message from that is that the group were really receptive to working together, see this as a great opportunity to try to expand the opportunities for flexible working in frontline clinical roles, and are keen to see us make some progress on that. We've done a baseline calculation in terms of how many people currently operating in clinical frontline roles have some sort of flexibility, and based upon the work we've done to date, circa 12% of staff in frontline roles either work part-time or have a formal flexible working agreement in place. So that's our starting point essentially, and obviously our aim through this programme is to seek to increase that quite significantly to meet the needs of staff to give that greater flexibility. So I just wanted to add that additionally to the action plan, and apart from that I'm happy to take any questions on the paper and the action plan.
Thank you very much, Kerry. BJ.
Thank you, Chair. Kerry, thank you very much for the update. So I'm looking at the action plan section, page 6, where there is a section on appraisals. My question is that the conversation and some of the narrative which was coming out of the staff survey, it wasn't centered so much on the rate of completion. It was more a commentary on their perception of what they actually got out of the process or not. So it was kind of centered around the quality of the conversation which they perceived they were having with their managers. And there was a discussion around this in one of the workforce committees some time ago. What I want to understand and seek some assurance on is whether that training for managers, not just in terms of conducting the appraisal process, but what the staff expectation is, what they're really looking for, is captured somewhere there.
Yeah, so absolutely. The education and training supporting the rollout of the new appraisal system covers not just the process of appraisal, but actually how to conduct a good and meaningful appraisal. And the whole appraisal itself has been developed to include particular sections around the big 3 vision, our values, and how you as a member of staff demonstrate those values in your role on a day-to-day basis, how you demonstrate your responsibilities in relation to equality and diversity, so the personal responsibilities you have. And actually there's also a section on health and well-being to ensure that the manager has an appropriate health and well-being conversation with the individual as well. So a real focus on trying to ensure that the appraisal conversation is a very meaningful conversation and not a tick box exercise.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Kerry? While we're thinking about it, Kerry, I've got one, and it's in relation to, are we clear about what we understand by flexible working and what we mean by that when we say it? Because to me, part-time working isn't flexible working. You can work part-time, but there'd be no flexibility because your manager won't allow you to be flexible in your part-time hours. So have we got a clear understanding of what we mean when we're talking to people about flexible working?
I think people have different understandings of what flexible working is. I have a personal view that flexible working will include part-time working, but it will include lots of other ways of working as well, whether that be condensed hours, certain days, flexible hours on a day-to-day basis. There's a whole host of things that I think fit in there, which is why the next step of our programme, particularly with our frontline colleagues, is to actually engage with frontline staff to understand what they consider flexible working to be, because it's no good us working and just setting a plan until we understand what flexible working means to those staff in frontline clinical roles, because we could be addressing the wrong thing if we don't do that piece of work next. So that's the next action, and it's set out in the action plan to engage with frontline staff to understand what flexibility means to them.
That's great, thank you. That's really reassuring. Thank you very much, Kerry. And it's great to see such progress being made on the priorities. Paminda, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Chair. Just on that point then, where we reach out to the staff and ask for their thoughts in terms of, okay, what does flexible working mean to you? It can be opening up a can of worms. In terms of how are you going to set those expectations that we want feedback, but we're not necessarily going to be able to accommodate everyone's wishes and wants. So I'm just curious to know, yes, we want to get a two-way dialogue on this, but how do we understand that we won't be able to necessarily meet everyone's needs?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm under no illusion, and nor are our divisional teams, that we may not be able to give everybody everything they want, But what we want to do is shift the culture to ensure that actually we can seek to try to accommodate staff members' request by being more open and more flexible. But absolutely, we won't be able to give everybody what they want, because we have to deliver a 24/7 service matched to our demand patterns, and there's absolutely no doubt about that. So I think it is important that we hear from staff in terms of what would work for them in terms of flexible working, but we're not setting out any promises here to say you will get exactly what you want. But what we have to do is manage those expectations in that conversation, Perminda.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're asked to take this paper for assurance. And I think we're happy to do that. So thank you very much, Kerry, for the update. Moving straight on then, we're going to the assurance section of the agenda. And first of all, we've got the Quality and Governance Committee annual report. Stuart.
Thank you. Basically, as ever, it pretty much does what it says on the tin. It is a report, quite a thorough report on what we've done. I'll take questions, assuming people have read it in a minute. There's two comments I wanted to make before then. One was, bear with me, I've just clicked on the wrong report. Thank you. One was, I think board colleagues know that I'm on a bit of a one-man crusade to sense check whether we need quite so many long reports going to committees and so forth. And when we were discussing this report in our own QGC before approving it, I think probably in the future we might put a few things into appendices, because a lot of it is telling the board what it already knows. The board already knows what we have alerted it to during the year. We can do it sort of more efficiently, I think. And the other comment I wanted to make, it actually isn't related to 1920 at all, but I wanted to really put on the record, because obviously during the COVID period to date, QGC has been one of the committees that has carried on monthly, which I think was the right decision. And I just wanted to put on record how comprehensive those meetings have been and how much progress has been made at a time when, you know, lots of things have been on hold. So that's a little bit off agenda in that it's about this year, not last. But I'll shut up now and take any questions.
Thank you, Stuart. Karen, you've got a question. Karen Sullivan.
Yeah, just a comment, thank you, Chairman. It's really just to pick up on the point that Stuart made about the length of reports. I'm working with my team at the moment looking at a new format for annual reports. So we've got a standard format for all of the committees, and as part of that work, we'll engage the chairs from the committees to get their views on it. But I'm anticipating that they'll look very different next year. Thank you.
Thank you for that update, Karen. Thank you. Any other questions from Stuart? Sorry, for Stuart, not from Stuart, or comments? Okay, so we'll accept this report for assurance and note that the governance team are looking at a different format for annual reports, which will be introduced for this year's report. Thank you. Following straight on then, we've got the record of business from the Quality and Governance subcommittees, and I think there are, is there just one record of business, or did I see two? Yeah, there are two records of business from two meetings. Again, we assume we've read them. Did you want to add anything, Nicola or Stuart?
No, I think that the alerts relate to the numbers of SIs we've reported, which is also included in the Chief Executive's report, and then operational performance, which I think we've had quite a long discussion on already.
Thank you. Stuart, did you want to add anything?
Almost exactly the same point, but also I think just worth drawing attention to one of the positives, which was the Clinical Audit and Research annual report for last year, which did include a huge variety of work, including various national and international recognition. So we did our trick of appending the executive summary to that, just to give that some airtime, because we thought it warranted it.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. That was really helpful. I've just got one question, Nicola. I'm not sure it actually relates to the Clinical Governance Committee rather than these two reports. And it's linked to what we were talking about in the Chief Exec's report and the IBR, and the issue to do with the fact that we're seeing our response times getting longer for all categories of patients across the board, from category 1 right the way through. And so we're seeing prolonged waits increasing, and that was evident in the IBR. And I'm just wondering if the Clinical Governance Committee are looking at confirming that there's no significant harm to patients from those prolonged waits, and what actions are we taking to try and assure ourselves of that?
Yeah, so you may remember last year when we were probably experiencing worse levels of prolonged waits actually than we are now. We implemented harm review process, and I can confirm that I've just reinstated that. So I'm having 100 electronic patient report forms pulled for me by Rob Spate's team at the moment to look at the 5 longest waits across each category, across each division, and I'll be reporting that to a future QGC. I think that will give us assurance both in terms of the levels of harm that may or may not be experienced, but also I think what we found when we looked at this last year was that our existing mechanisms for monitoring harm were working, because in doing those random reviews, we didn't find any cases of harm that had not already been identified through, for example, our instant review group. So I would hope that we'll see the same thing again, but yet really important that we start to look at that given the deteriorating position. I will also be speaking to our commissioners. You might remember that last year I was really keen that rather than us just look at harm from our own organisation's perspective, that we did end-to-end harm reviews so that we could gain any learning from how patients were managed prior to their interaction with us. And I think that's even more important this year, because we know that there's some evidence that people are delaying seeking help because of their fears around COVID. So I think it's really important that that part of the work is done this year, and also that we follow up to make sure that we are including our acute colleagues so that we can really understand the longer term impact for our patients. So that work is just about to start. I'm just literally waiting for the EPRFs to land in my inbox, and then I shall get on with that piece of work.
That's great. Thank you very much. That's very reassuring, Nicola. Thank you.
Pauline, it's maybe worth adding as well that on a weekly basis we consider this position at the exec meeting as well. So whilst we don't have the in-depth information related to the harm review, we do consider prolonged wait, data, performance standards, SIs, etc.
Thank you very much. If there are no further questions, then can we take these records of business from...
There's VJ.
Sorry, VJ, I missed your hand. Oh, sorry, VJ.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just quickly go back to Stuart's point about the clinical audit research annual report. It is actually excellent, and it shows the partnerships, the collaborations, and the innovative work that this particular team delivers, and the research which has local, national, international impact, and the citations which they get. And I think it's another thing which we as EMAS organization need to celebrate more of and highlight the work that's happening. Thank you.
Thank you, VJ. That's a really good point, because I sort of glossed over that quite quickly, but you're absolutely right. We need to recognise and celebrate our reputation in clinical audit and research, and this annual report is a very good reminder of that. So thank you for including that. Okay, so we'll take this for assurance, note the harm review that Nicola's going to be undertaking, and we'll report through the Clinical Governance Committee. Thank you. The next item on the agenda then is the record of business from the Finance and Performance Committee, and I think there might be, actually there are 2 reports there as well. Anything to add, Mike?
No, I think the only thing worthy note to the Trust Board, we've got a high degree of certainty now in terms of what the financial regime is going to be for the second half of the year from October through to March. Has allowed us then to commit to make some more long-term commitments. You'll set later in the agenda, particularly with the PAS So good news for us, and we know a bit more certainty about where we're going and what cash we're getting in.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Karen, did you want to add anything?
Not as such, Pauline, no. I mean, there is a third report because we've just had the October meeting, but our key alert at that meeting was the contract performance and delivery metrics, which we've talked about extensively. So other than that, nothing further to add.
Okay, thank you very much. If there are no further questions, then we'll receive this report, or both reports, for assurance. Thank you. And then the next is the
Audit Committee annual report.
It's the Audit Committee annual report. Thank you, and that's presented to us by Gary.
Thank you. So present the report here for assurance. Probably just two things to draw out if I can. One is at the top of page 7 is the internal audit's head of audit opinion, which is a significant assurance of a governance, risk management and control in the trust, which is important to draw that out. And the second point is when we did our self-review, one thing that came through was we believed we need to probably better address the balance between quality and financial assurance in future meetings, because we have heavily focused on financial assurance. That's not to say we've had no quality assurance. We have. We want to just reflect on that balance and make sure going forward for the next year we can better address that.
Thank you very much, Gary. Any questions or comments for Gary on the annual report? Okay, thank you. Well, we'll receive that for assurance. Thank you. And then we've got the terms of reference. We've got the record of business from the Audit Committee meeting, which was held on the 6th of October, which again is coming for assurance. Any questions or comments? Or did you want to add anything, Mike?
No, absolutely not. No, thank you.
No. Gary, did you want to add anything?
No, I'm happy to take it as read. Thank you.
Could I just ask a question about the write-offs for overpayments? And I don't particularly want to go into the detail of the write-offs. What I'm interested in really is what steps are we taking to prevent that happening again? Because we can't keep writing off overpayments. One of the things we've got to get right is paying our staff on a regular, on a proper basis. And I don't think we need to put some mechanisms in place. And I'd be interested to hear, Mike, what we're doing to prevent this recurring.
Unmute, Mike.
Mike or Gary, either of you can give me a bit of assurance.
Yeah. This was one point we actually spent quite a lot of time talking about in the committees, because whilst we were happy to, we're not happy, but whilst we tabled and reviewed the current situation in terms of these debts, we were also very keen to prevent this happening in the future. And we looked at a number of measures. There's actually a working group looking to improve the mechanisms by which money is paid and also recouped where needed. And that's been led by part of Mike's team. So we take regular reports from that team, and we've given that, I guess, the weight of our support in terms of moving that forward. We're also quite keen to ensure that where losses do occur, they're passed back to divisions. So it's not something which is just taken centrally and becomes anonymous. And I mean, they're probably the two key things that I can recall from the meeting. What we're looking to do here is to try and take that further and have our internal audit colleagues help us write out to people who have incurred debts and not repaid. These are ex-employees, to try and use the fraud angle, because if they've spent that money they've received, knowing they've received it in error, that becomes fraudulent. So we want to just use that angle as well, and our internal audit colleagues are helping us with that.
Thank you very much, Gary. Karen, you wanted to come in.
It's okay, Chair. Gary's covered the point I was going to raise.
Okay, thank you very much. So if there are no further comments or questions, can we accept this report for assurance from the Audit Committee? Yeah, okay, great. We've then got the Workforce Committee annual report, which is presented to us by VJ.
Thank you, Chair. So I take that the report is read. It's pretty standard. It covers the period from April 2019 to March 2020. I'd just like to pick up on 2 points. One is in section 4 on page 9, where there's a reference to the staff engagement. And I think that is really important bit of work which Workforce Committee does in terms of hearing directly from our divisional managers and their teams who take the time to come to the committee and talk us through the various workforce metrics and other things which we wish to seek assurance on.
I think we've lost you, VJ. I think you've frozen. VJ, I think we've lost you. Can you hear us? No, I think we've lost VJ. So we'll.
Kerry will be able to pick up.
Kerry, pick that point up. Yeah.
In VJ's absence, yes, I think the point that VJ was making was the contribution we have by having the divisional teams come periodically and talk about the local perspective, which I think gives the Workforce Committee information to be able to triangulate against the metrics that we receive on a regular basis. So I think that's a very important point. Other than that, happy to take any questions on the annual report as read.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on the annual report or comments? No? Well, that will take it for assurance. Noting Karen, we've temporarily lost a connection with VJ, and we'll acknowledge when she returns to us. Okay, thank you. And then we've got the record of business from the Workforce Committee on the end of September. Anything to add, Kerry?
Nothing to add, Chair, but happy to take any questions from members.
Thank you. Any questions for Kerry on the record of business from the end of September meeting? No.
Gary Brown's.
Thank you, Karen. Gary, you've got a question. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's just at the top of the meeting, we had a conversation around welfare of staff. There's a point there about sickness increasing in this report as an alert. And I just wonder whether there are any common themes behind that sickness, minded that we don't actually put people stood down waiting for tests as part of sickness.
Yeah, there's obviously a big focus at the Workforce Committee in terms of staff health and wellbeing. So reported here, the alert around sickness absence was the noted increase in sickness absence since August, where we started to see it gradually rise from the lower levels that we'd seen in the early part of the year. Some of that is due to the fact that some staff who were previously shielding for underlying conditions as part of the COVID measures, when shielding ceased, some of those staff weren't able to return to work because their GPs certified them as not fit for work because of those underlying conditions. So that is one of the reasons where we've seen sickness rise. On top of that, we've seen the sickness around anxiety, stress and depression, which we've talked about previously, and then a number of sicknesses related to musculoskeletal issues, back issues, etc. One of the challenges we're finding at the moment as well is with the cancellation of surgeries, any members of staff who were awaiting a surgery that has been delayed because of the COVID period, that's obviously delaying the sickness and return to work. The other element is where surgeries are taking place and procedures are taking place, members of staff are having to shield pre and post surgery. So again, it's extending the length of time on sickness. So there are multiple factors really that are contributing to our current levels of sickness absence. As at the end of October, we're currently standing at 4.99% unvalidated, our year-to-date position on sickness absence. But it is fair to say it has been rising since August, which is why we set it out as an alert at the last workforce committee.
Thanks, Kerry. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Kerry. That's really helpful. I don't think we've got VJ back.
VJ's back.
Are you back with us, VJ? Okay. You're back with us, VJ.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chair, and my apologies. I'm not sure what happened with the internet, but just staying with this particular item for the moment, I just want to pick up on two things. One is under the assure section, we had a really good presentation on the Derbyshire Cultural Audit from Zeal Solutions and also from Tim Slater from the Derbyshire division. That was excellent work that had been done there. And on the same section, bullet point 7, to do with the rest, we did note as a committee various actions and the progress that was being made. However, we did still remain concerned about the workforce numbers and in terms of the BAME representation there, but we did acknowledge that the actions were sort of in progress, as it were.
Thank you very much, VJ. Any further questions for VJ or carry on this record of business? No, well, in that case, then we'll accept the paper for assurance. Thank you very much. I'm glad you're back with us, VJ. We'll move straight on then, and the next item on the agenda under the governance section is the extension of the contract for electronic patient record software, and that's presented to us by Will. This is for decision today.
Thank you very much, Chair. Hopefully the paper is self-explanatory. This is dealing with the software element of the electronic patient report form system that we have. We currently are in contract until May 2021 with the existing system, and this paper is seeking to extend that to May 2023. That's within the bounds of the procurement exercise which we ran and the G-Cloud framework that we've bought this from. So from a procurement perspective, it's as straightforward as us agreeing to extend the contract within the terms that are already there. You can see that the total cost for doing this for those additional 2 years is just over £1.1 million plus VAT. That's within budget, it's within the IM&T allocations that are already in place. If the board is minded to approve this today, which is the recommendation, what this does do is it does make us or allow us to get the most of our investments that we've already made into our EPRF system, because since we bought this system, we've spent quite a lot of money out of capital and revenue on an ongoing basis to update the system with additional features such as the primary care record lookup and other reporting features that we've worked with the commissioners on failed pathways, etc. And I'm keen, and obviously the process that we've gone through to get this paper here has recognised that actually to recognise that investment and to make the most of that investment, it would be right for us to extend the system out to the full length of the contract. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Will. And I noticed that the paper's been through the Finance Performance Committee and they recommend approval of the paper. Stuart.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a very clear paper, Will. I'm certainly supportive of it. I just wanted to kind of double check or cross check that by doing this, how it relates to the various things on the digital transformation red, amber, green that we saw a few papers ago. I'm assuming they're all in lockstep together.
They are, and you're quite right to raise that point, Stuart, because the eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that there was a red against EPRF on the digital transformation programme. Obviously, that was related to a couple of months ago because of the timing of reporting, but also the hardware element. So obviously there's two sides of EPRF. There's the software bit, so that's what this is dealing with. The other bit is the hardware element, so that's the physical device that the crews use on the front line. They're coming towards end of life and need replacement as well. And what we don't have currently programmed into our capital plan is a replacement of those devices on a capital basis or a revenue basis in the IM&T revenue. So the red in the digital program is around the funding stream identified to replace the hardware side, not this software element. And that's because there's various other choices for us to make as an organisation going forward as to whether we want to issue personal devices for EPRF going forward, whether we want to continue to have it on a vehicle basis, etc. But that said, the Finance Performance Committee, when it took the paper on this extension, also included a level of option appraisal around that as well, and that continues to be work in progress with a business case. So this is just a software element. But you're right, Stuart, to ask a question about how it dovetails with the digital transformation work.
Thank you. Okay, if there are no further questions, then we're asked to approve the extension of the current contract as described in the paper for a further 2 years. Okay, and we're happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then we've got a paper on PAS procurement, which is presented to us by Ben, and again is for decision and approval. Ben.
Yeah, I'm going to swerve this one and pass it over to someone much more qualified than I on this one. Mike's going to take this.
Okay.
I'm just going to mute myself. I'm just realising when I was answering that audit question, Chairman, I was talking away merrily to myself actually, and thanks, Gary, for picking it up. I didn't realise I was on mute. Now this one we've trailed the operational requirement and need for this quite earlier on, and it's a real benefit to us that we can actually get this additional resource. But we're concentrating more on the financial side of it, because this was the thing that was delaying this paper, was the resolving the finances of the second half of the year. And it's pleasing to note that, as I said earlier, we've done that. That will allow us now to go out and place contracts with our PAS providers. Just getting back to a point that Gary made earlier about the funded activity. Ben's right. Our indicative activity plan is as it was. However, because we're funded at December levels last year, not the average, we do gain a little bit by that, and we've got additional COVID money as well. That's allowing us at the moment to put about 3.2% extra resources out than we did this time last year, which is obviously helping us and helping get rid of some of that activity deficit and resourcing deficit. So on this one, we've got need for it. We now know we've got the money for it, and we're recommending they've been for the F&P. We're recommending to the board that we place these contracts to allow us to continue to shore up our resources.
Thanks very much, Mike. Any questions or comments for Mike before we approve the paper? No. Okay, so we're asked to approve the extension of the current PAS contracts through till the end of March, and then also to approve the total value expenditure for this year of 12 million, just over 12 million on PAS services. We're happy to do that? Yeah, okay, that's great. Thank you very much. And then straight on to the governance report, which is presented to us by Karen.
Thank you, Chairman. There are two elements to this report, which I'll just outline very briefly. One relates to a review of the scheme of delegation, which we tend to do annually, and the paper sets out the proposed amendments to that. I would like to highlight and apologise for a typo on the front sheet of the paper. The first bullet point refers to approval of the documents by the clinical commissioning group. It's actually the clinical governance group, and that typographical error is repeated on page 5 of the actual document itself, the section which explains the amendments in the document. So we will, assuming the board approves this, we'll amend that before it's finalised and published. And then the second element of the report is a relatively minor amendment to the terms of reference of the executive team. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. Any questions for Karen?
No, thank you.
No, thank you. We note the typographical error, which will be corrected, and with that we're happy to approve both these documents, Karen. Thank you. And then the board assurance framework, this wonderful document we like to receive every month. So Karen, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. As you say, this is a report which we receive every meeting at the board, and the front sheet, as usual, outlines all of the proposed changes. The only thing I particularly want to highlight this time is the reference to the risk appetite statement towards the end of the executive summary in the front sheet. we haven't reviewed that for some time because we haven't had the opportunity to get together as a board because of the current COVID situation. I've reviewed it and discussed it with executive colleagues, and I'm of the view that that still stands as our risk appetite statement, but obviously it's for the board to agree that, and I'm asking that you do that at this meeting.
Thank you very much, Karen. Any questions or comments from Karen before we go through the recommendations on the report? No. Okay, great. So we're asked to approve the revised BAF, including the changes to the risk wording and the scored as outlined in the report. We're all happy to do that. Yep. We're asked to agree that risk 18 should be added to the board assurance framework. Yeah.
Yes.
We confirm that the board assurance framework adequately identifies the organisation's strategic risks, and the risks are scored at the appropriate level in line with the Trust Board's risk appetite. Yep.
Yes.
We consider whether we have sufficient assurance in relation to the risks included in the BAF.
Yes.
Yeah, great. And then finally, we agree the trust risk appetite statement is set out in the report above. Yeah, great. Looks as if you've got agreement for that, kind of, Karen. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
That's great. Okay, I think that brings us to the end of our meeting in public. So just before we close the meeting, I want to acknowledge that this will be Jane Ide's last Trust Board meeting. She's leaving the Trust at the end of December, so we will meet her again in our board discussion session in December, but this will be the last Trust Board meeting that Jane will be with us for. And I wanted to really just to say thank you to Jane and wish her the very best of luck in her new endeavours. She's worked with us now for 3 years, more or less, first as a next director from the NHSIE development scheme, and then for 2 years as an associate director, non-executive director with EMAS, and she's made a very valuable contribution, particularly bringing a different aspect to the board table around the third sector, which I know I've certainly found very beneficial to our discussions. So thank you very much, Jane, and we wish you very good luck and best wishes for the future. Okay, with that then, we'll close the meeting and we'll reconvene at 12:30. Is that okay for everybody? Got time to have a bit of lunch? Get back together at 12:30 for our confidential session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.